And we are live. What's up, wrestling fans? See, I got it right
And,
this time. It didn't even surprise me. I'm getting better at that.
and you know that they're wrestling fans because if they were movie fans watching right now, they would be watching on delay because they're probably watching the Oscars. It is Oscars night,
It is Oscars night.
so either it is Oscars night, which is why our topic is about a movie tonight. Maybe you are a movie fan and you're just like boycotting the Oscars because they snubbed Iron Claw this year. Well, never fear, the two bros have your back. We are not ignoring Iron Claw.
Nope.
That is our main event topic. We are
Indeed
going to
it
talk
is.
the Iron Claw. We're going to review the movie itself, and we're also going to dive into the things that they changed from the real life story and maybe why they did so, whether or not we agreed with those decisions. There's actually a lot there to talk about.
There's quite a bit there to talk about. It's such a great movie, but such a heavy movie. But we'll get into
Well,
that in the main event.
we will get that in the main event, but got to do an opening bell first. And of course, nothing is heavy like news, right?
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. Let's begin tonight with the wild story of Kevin Kelly and his firing from AEW.
What is going
Man, and Doug, I know this has never happened before, but it seems one's online rantings have led to his dismissal. I know the internet can be used for bad.
Right? Who thought posting and airing all your dirty laundry online would, result in a firing?
Who could have guessed or saw it coming? Actually, if you really looked back to Kevin Kelly's hiring, I have to honestly say, kidding aside, I could not have seen this coming.
Right.
I think most of us had pretty high expectations for Kevin Kelly. He had quite the reputation coming off of New Japan, and before that, Ring of Honor, well respected as one of the voices of wrestling. He was quickly relegated to color commentary. Tony Schiavone took over, given the lead job, and now we know that part of this at least may be personality driven. As Doug alluded to, and I've been alluding to with the online rantings, Kelly took to X last week to blast the way he was being used as an announcer in AEW, which, fair enough, but not the way to really, get your boss's attention. To make it worse, he accused fellow announcer, the great Ian Riccaboni, of sabotaging his career and libeling him.
What?
And Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, back in the day, wasn't the reason Kelly got a look is because Ian Riccaboni didn't take the job and recommended him?
Yes.
I thought so. And then he turns on Riccaboni for having the gall to libel him. You know what he libeled him over?
I'm not real familiar with what the rant was about. What was this about?
So all Riccaboni did was come out publicly against the QAnon conspiracy theories that Kelly had been championing online.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of where I thought. That's kind of where I landed on it too. I had always been a Kevin Kelly fan, and then I heard all that. I'm like, okay, maybe it's all right that you're gone.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
From one scandal, Doug, to another. You ever heard of this guy named McMahon?
No, I'm not familiar with him. Can you tell me some more about him, Kev?
So Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
What has he done this week?
Well, this week, I guess it goes to show that no bad deed goes unrewarded, perhaps. Former TKO Group Holdings executive chairman Vince McMahon is selling roughly 25% of his remaining stock in the company. According to an SEC filing on Monday, McMahon is selling 5.3 million shares of TKO stock. He's expected to make more than $400 million from the sale. And even with that, he will hold around now roughly 8.3% of the company. This latest comes after he previously sold 8.4 million shares in November, making 700 million. So do the math here there in a couple of months while his scandal's gone on. The dude is cashed out to the tune of $1 billion, which goes to show you can't really publish or punish the wealthy, can you?
Well, maybe it's all going towards NDAs that he has to pay for, and he realized he needs to keep those payments up from now on the other NDAs.
I mean, the dude just made $1 billion. He can afford a couple of million in payouts. You know, why he stops paying, I guess.
I don't understand.
While we're talking about Vince, Doug, the new 2K video game is now out, getting rave reviews. This, you know where I'm going with this, right?
It's all this one.
This year's edition has a 40 years of WrestleMania theme with the option of playing classic Mania moments, which, of course, Vince has been a part of many of those moments. But obviously owning up to the scandal and Vince's exit from WWE, many of the digitized moments that feature Vince in the game have now the former WWE chairman's face blurred out. Kind of an odd choice. Obviously, there's not enough time to cut him from the game completely. But Doug, I saw where like it's kind of hit or miss. There's people saying there are moments where Vince appears unblurred, and then there's times when his face is not seen.
And how long is it before somebody does like the director's cut or the unedited, the Vince version of this, and hacks it, and we have like full on Vince again? How long until that exists in the world?
Probably as long as it took you to finish that sentence.
Probably. I'm sure there's an AI somewhere right now already working on it.
It's already working on it. Moving on to AEW, numerous reports of dissatisfaction behind the scenes in the company with one Tony Khan. Those reports all are pointing to the long-term booking being a thing of the past. Wrestlers traveling to Dynamite on Wednesdays or Collisions on Saturdays, only to find they are not booked on the show. There's very little planning being done ahead of time. Additional information coming out of these reports note that Tony has an inability to get talent to do what he wants. If talent, for example, decide they don't like something or don't want to do it, Tony just rewrites it rather than using his prerogative as the boss to insist.
Yeah, I've read Doug, that. A lot of that is just not good. It's just not good. But I think if you look back to that was the fallout from All Out, that All Out press scrum, right, where he's just sitting there and Punk is ranting and going on and going on and going on, and he's almost he just looks helpless. And I don't know if he gets so starstruck by these folks or he's just okay, we'll take care of it, I'll rewrite it. I can see that happening, but come on, man,
you're a billionaire, you're the owner. Like, can we, looking at these last couple of stories, can we maybe find an executive somewhere between a Tony Khan and a Vince McMahon? Like, right? We should Frankenstein this and get the better qualities of each, because there's no way in the world a Vince McMahon would ever allow talent to push him around like that.
Right. But I mean, there, just some levels in between Tony and his talent too, like some separation there. Put some, a level of separation in there. This is, get some writers, get some. Yeah,
I don't see Tony signing a bunch of NDAs either. So there's good and bad comes with it.
I mean, because you got Christopher Janosz, you got Jerry Lynn, you've got Brian Danielson there. There's people who could make decisions and say, no, this is what we're doing.
This is what we're doing.
This is the way the boss has made it. This is creative's
get a spine. Get a spine, Tony, and let's go back to some long-term booking. We miss that.
Yes, we do.
Another big free agent, Doug, off the table. Former MLW World Champion Alex Hammerstone is signed with TNA. I would have pegged him for WWE or AEW. So to me, this is a coup. In my mind, for the still spunky TNA, who are doing a lot of things well right now. They got him an ace in a hole with Alex Hammerstone. Really did think he was going to one of the big two.
And that's good. TNA, I think, needed some good news after losing their basically their godfather.
Yeah,
who ushered in like a brand new era there. So.
And supposedly, despite those changes, that the morale backstage, unlike AEW, is high. So TNA, I think the men and women backstage know they're a part of something that's going well right now, and they're just rolling with it. So or either that, or maybe they found the EY's speech so inspirational
I'm
too, which
telling you,
it was,
man.
man.
It was great. It's
I'm all in.
great. Right?
Last episode, Doug, we discussed El Hijo del Vinkingo's possible knee injury. The injury was as bad as feared. The superstar had to have surgery. The Wrestling Observer is reporting that Vinkingo will be out of action for, quote, a long time as a result. So not good.
Not good.
Speaking of lucha talent, many CMLL wrestlers are having their visas immediately canceled by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security due to a communications breakdown with the Texas-based indie promotion that sponsors them. This is supposedly throwing a major wrench into AEW's plans for the CMLL invasion that uses so much of the CMLL talent. And obviously it's throwing a wrench in the plans of a lot of WrestleMania weekend promotions that bring in AAA talent and CMLL talent to fill out those cards with dream matches. The list of those having to return and stay in Mexico includes Hechericho, Mascara Dorado, Sabanero Jr., Templaro, Valdar Jr., Blue Panther, Robin, Dulce Gardenia, Sagrado, Captain Suicida, Espirito Negro, Euphoria, Fugaza, Sangra Imperial, Gemelo Diablo 1, and Gemelo Diablo 2.
Well said, my friend. Well said. This is why you do all the news. And I sit here and smile and nod.
I just put this story in to test myself. I probably got half of those wrong, but
this is where I would have employed an AI to just read all that text.
Oh, hopefully that gets cleared up soon so that those men and women can come back across the border and ply their trade here.
Wow.
Thank you. Doug, we're going to end with two stories, one a sad one, and then we'll end on a happy one because we'll do the sad one first. Rest in peace. I know we had a couple legends pass away, and we had to talk about Ole and Virgil last time around. Well, now we're saying goodbye to the legendary Butcher Paul Vachon, who passed away this week at the age of 86. At least he lived a nice long life. The Canadian began wrestling in the 1950s with his brother Maurice. Won tag team gold in both the AWA, the NWA. He also worked in WWF and around the world. His last match was in 1987. He also promoted wrestling for a while. Paul was one of 13 children, and his sister also wrestled as Vivian Vachon. And younger fans who maybe don't remember the Butcher might remember his adopted daughter, the late Luna Vachon. The Butcher had been battling cancer in recent years, so condolences to the family, the friends, and the fans of Paul Vachon. And then after condolences, since we do have a heavy topic tonight with the Iron Claw, let's end the news on a positive note with congratulations to Dominic Mysterio, who this week married his childhood sweetheart. The internet is full of photos. If you want to go out there and look to see what wrestlers were in attendance, it looks like, obviously Ray was there, of course, but it appears that maybe Damian Priest and Austin Theory might have been groomsmen.
Priest was definitely a groomsman. Because I've seen, and these kids are just so damn cute too. Because
they are cute.
You nailed it. They are childhood sweethearts because you can see them. It looks like they were 12 when they met or something. There's all these pictures. Of course, they look like they're 12 now to me.
It's true. There's that too.
But yeah, it was just a fun time. Great, a great positive vibe.
Mommy was even there, apparently approved.
Right.
She was fine for not coming out on top.
Mommy's always on top, Kevin.
Although, and I'm sure if you saw this too. I mean, it's all positive except for the booze. Dirty Dom, that was fantastic. Dirty Dom even got booed during the reception when he tried to speak.
This is great.
Fantastic stuff. Congratulations, Dominic and his bride. To the happy couple. Doug, with that, we're moving on to our main event.
All right, here we go.
The Iron Claw. What is there to say about the Iron Claw other than if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. If you haven't seen it and don't want spoilers, then why are you watching this show? You're a wrestling fan. You know what happens.
Right.
But we are definitely going to be talking about the movie and what happens in the movie. So if for whatever reason you do not know and don't want to know, you can stop watching now. But Doug the Iron Claw tells the tragic real life story of the world famous Von Erich wrestling clan of brothers. And there were a lot of folks who genuinely thought it might have Oscar potential. Sadly, it came away with no nominations, but it did overperform at the box office and was extremely well reviewed by everyone.
Everybody, yeah.
Doug, I mean, as far as a movie goes, we can watch through a wrestling lens and we can watch just as a movie fan. If you're not a wrestling fan, I think that you could still enjoy this movie. You do not have to be familiar with the Von Erich story to be amazed that this is actually a true story.
I agree with that because, I mean, it is a very heavy family drama at the end of the day. That's what this is, that just happens to be centered around a wrestling family. And, you know, wrestling is more of the backdrop. There's so much of the family dynamics, especially the relationship between the brothers and their father. Yeah, it's much more a heavy family drama. And I'm not sure if I've said this yet, but it's a very heavy movie.
It is a very heavy movie. And there's really, I mean, there's not a whole lot of, there's not a lot of ways that you can make this story that is based in reality happy. I mean, there are a few lighthearted moments you see with the brothers. Kevin Von Erich is the only surviving Von Erich, and they didn't consult with Kevin, but they did seek his, maybe not approval, but they showed it to see what he would think. And if Kevin could sign off on this, we should be fine with it, because
Absolutely.
that dude had to live it. And it could not be easy to see these tragedies that keep befalling the Von Erich family played out on screen. They did show, the one thing that Kevin asked is that he wanted to make sure that they, you know, you can show Dad for what Dad was. You have to tell the story dark because it is dark. But the one thing he did ask is that he wanted to be seen as the brothers loving one another. And I think that the filmmakers honored that request, and that throughout, whether it's the way that they pat each other on the shoulder or hug each other or whatever, you can truly feel love between the brothers and the actors portraying the brothers on screen. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. There's definitely a very familial bond there, even with the actors. They go out of their way to develop that. I'm not sure if they spent a lot of time together beforehand. I mean, I know a lot of them had to like train very hard, very fast to learn a lot. I think Chavo Guerrero actually did all the wrestling coordination, or at least trained that for Efron. Yeah. But, I'm sure that they spent time together. I mean, these are all top tier actors too. Every one of those boys.
Yeah, let's talk about the acting performances. You mentioned Zach. Obviously, he is the lead character. The movie does center on Kevin, which makes sense as he is, again, spoilers, but again, you go in as wrestling fans knowing the story. That doesn't take away from the fact that the story is going to still grab you. Even when you know what to expect, it still grabs you because of those performances, Doug. And Zac Efron, who maybe wouldn't have been first person you would think of for such a serious role, but he is almost unrecognizable. He disappears into the role of Kevin.
Absolutely.
It is a quiet portrayal. It's not an over the top portrayal, but then again, Kevin was kind of the quiet, brother. And so I think in that regard, it was perfect. The bigger personality was Carrie, who was played by Jeremy Allen White, who I am a huge fan of. If you've not, folks out there watching, if you've not seen The Bear, you need to watch The Bear, fantastic TV series. But I thought that he did a great job also inhabiting the Carrie. Those are really the two brothers that are more central to the narrative of this story.
Absolutely. And both of those fellas do excellent jobs in their roles. Amazing. You've got
Zach really bulked up too. That's the other thing where he's unrecognizable. And I guess if there's one thing that you could quibble about the two leads is that in some ways Jeremy Allen White looks more like could look more pass more for Kevin and Zach vice versa, because in real life, I mean, Kerry Von Erich looked like a superhero. He testosterone fueled, giant muscles, and yes, Jeremy Allen White got big, but he is way smaller than Kerry Von Erich ever was. And on screen, Zac Efron actually has gotten so big, he's bigger than what Kevin Von Erich was in real life.
Right.
And so on screen, Kerry is smaller than Kevin, when in real life it's the other way around. Obviously, if you're a movie fan and you're just watching it does not take away at all from the basic tenets of the story. But it's one of those things that wrestling fans might go, that looks a little strange. It doesn't detract in any way.
It really doesn't. And the guy who plays Carrie was on a talk show. I don't remember which one it was, but he's talking about getting in touch with the director, and he reads the script. And he's like, "Yeah, this is a great script. I'm interested." So he really wasn't that familiar with the family.
Yeah.
So he starts researching them, and he's like, "Wait a minute, this guy's like what 6'3", 6'4", and he's like 5'8", maybe 5'10". Yeah. He's like, "Are you sure this is the right Von Erich for me?"
But he is such a great actor. Who, you know, one. I mean, I think it probably helped the movie, quite honestly, that he had been cast, and then in the interim of the movie being made and coming out, he become a hot property. So a lot of folks probably went and saw it because of him. He's been an Emmy winner and been center of attention because of the success of The Bear. Probably didn't hurt the movie at all.
Absolutely,
either. For the most part, let's talk supporting cast too. I think for the most part, the cast looks the part. The production wise, everything, it looked and sounded like world-class championship wrestling. It looked like and felt like the 80s, from the Sportatorium to the Freebirds, which included a turn by NWA's Silas Machen as Terry Gordy. And you mentioned Chavo earlier. He did not only choreograph, he played the Sheik.
Yes.
We got MJF as Lance Von Erich. More on that later. Ryan Nemeth as Gino Hernandez. But even the non-wrestlers do a pretty good job, for the most part, channeling the real individuals they're portraying, especially the guy doing Fritz. I thought not only was he a great actor, that dude really felt like Fritz Von Erich. He looked the part of Fritz Von Erich.
He did. He brought this the intensity to that role too, which I imagine that is like even the behind the scenes, because I think Fritz Von Erich, he's almost portrayed as this is Fritz Von Erich in the ring, this is Fritz Von Erich with his family backstage, and there's almost very little difference there.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah, for the boys their marching orders and expect them to give a yes sir and take off and do what they're told.
So, Doug, when we're talking about the supporting cast mostly looking the part, that leads us invariably to the elephant in the room. And we can just go ahead and get this one out of the way, I think, up front here. And the largest complaint, and this isn't just you and I, even though we have talked about this part, but it is the largest complaint I hear from wrestling fans who have seen the movie. And that is, let's talk about the portrayal of Ric Flair.
Man, Ric Flair is a legend. Ric Flair deserves his own movie like this at some point, a biopic like this. But the guy, I do not understand how you can have such an excellent movie about wrestling and about the Von Erich family, and have all these other people just salt and peppered throughout, where you have these wrestling personalities playing these old school wrestlers. Then you get this dude. To be Ric Flair. I'm not sure this guy even knew who Ric Flair was. I'm not sure he did any research. I think he just read the lines and walked out there and tried to do something. I do not get this characterization of Flair. Don't understand it.
Before I did want to go in as unspoiled as I could and make up my own mind. So I avoided a lot of reviews and the like, but I come out of there, and of course, when I leave the theater, I start looking up the movie. I leave the very impressed by the film, but I thought surely somebody else has got to be complaining about. And then when I got online, I realized that was all that people were complaining about, is the dude that played Ric Flair. To your point, the greatest of all time, the most charismatic performer in the history of professional wrestling, and
Right.
you cast a actor who is completely devoid of charisma to portray the most charismatic. Now, I understand Ric Flair in some ways would be hard to cast. He is so indelible that you're either going to get someone who might be like doing an over the top caricature that it detracts, but I don't understand if you're worried about that going so far the other direction
So
that you just
far.
have someone that, like, sucks the air out of the room whenever he was on the screen. Fortunately, he's not in it very much, but you said it. It's otherwise almost a perfect film, and then there's this one glaring like error in judgment that could have
It's
made it a truly perfect film had they cast differently.
I don't know, maybe the maybe the director was never a Flair fan, so let's make him look as bad as possible and elevate the Von Erichs.
I mean,
I
I've got
don't
to feel
get this
sorry for the
point.
dude just because, I mean, he's getting slagged like left and right. I've not read one positive thing about his performance, but I mean, there really isn't much positive to say about the portrayal of
It's
Ric Flair.
not.
It's one of the few missteps in an otherwise great film.
I'm just reading from I want to call him Jesse Eisenberg, but that's not right. What's the Eisenberg guy's name? Aaron Dean Eisenberg played Flair, and he's talking about, yeah, when he first got the role, he did some research on Flair. He did not do enough, let me say.
Yeah, I don't understand how you do any research on Flair and think that you were doing an accurate portrayal, but yeah. That aside, I don't have any quibbles in casting. I don't really have too much in quibbles to what we see on screen, other than and I wanted to, before we switch gears into the things that the movie either got wrong intentionally or mistakenly. Let's talk about a decision that was made that's caused some debate as well, and that is after the. And again, I know if you're watching this, you probably know the story, but each brother succumbs to demons of a certain sort, or if you're the superstitious type, the Von Erich curse, if you will,
Right.
till you end up with, just the last remaining brother, Kevin. There's a scene near the end of the movie where Kevin daydreams, I presume. At first, I wasn't sure if it was a dream or a daydream. It's not really made clear, but he's visualizing heaven with his departed brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, some people thought this was hokey. Some people thought it was unnecessary with such a reality-based movie. And then there were some thought that it maybe, particularly with the overdoses and the
Mm-hmm.
suicides and all the other horrible things, might not have the right impression that everything's going to be okay in the end.
Right.
It isn't exactly where they leave the film, but it is near the end. I want your thoughts on what you felt about that scene in particular.
So, having watching the film, I think there's no, unfortunately, with the Von Erich family and all the tragedies that befall the family, and I felt the movie could not end. I mean, you need that go home moment, right? I mean, first of all, it's a wrestling movie, so you got to send the crowd home happy, right? You need that go home moment. And I think this is the closest they could get to a go home moment. You need something uplifting because this movie is a celebration of these brothers and the love they have for each other. It it's told with the backdrop of all this tragedy that befalls them, but the theme is this brotherly love. It's this family. Zach Efron early on playing Kevin Von Erichs talking about he wants his brothers there. His life is his brothers. It's brothers, brothers, brothers. So to me, and I can see the points where it is kind of hokey because I think it is a smidge hokey,
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily think it glorifies the unaliving of the characters in the movie. These aren't just characters; these are real human beings. At one point, I don't think it glorifies that and tries to send a positive message that it's still going to work out in the end. But I think from a storytelling standpoint, it had to be done, or something like that needed to be done to just kind of lift everybody up because that comes hot on the heels of one of the last of Carrie Von Erich's death. You need something to bring it back up because at this point so many people have died in this movie and face all this tragedy. It just needed something to lift it back up.
So I can definitely see it both ways. I definitely, for me personally, it did kind of take me out of the movie for a moment because it seemed so out of place with everything that came before and after that we have in a sort of a fantasy sequence.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I try to justify it by like, this isn't a glorification of suicide or the fact that you can do something and it'll all be okay in the end. You'll get to be together in the afterlife. I sort of see it more as an aspirational hope of Kevin Von Erich to try to like, for his own mental sanity, the hope that I can one day maybe see my brothers again. So I understand, to your point, why we needed a little bit of hope in an otherwise pretty hopeless story. But I do think we get that with the children and things that we see, like there are Von Erichs and generations that will go on. So I don't know that it was necessary. I know the director has talked quite a bit about it. So if you're interested in, if you're out there interested in why he made those decisions, definitely I would suggest Googling and reading his take on it. I don't know that it was necessary, and I do think it was a little bit hokey, but I also understand it. It did not. Again, that and the Flair portrayal are the two things I left away. And when I turned to my wife afterwards and was, raving about the movie, and then when I'd like, okay, now I'm going to quibble. Those were the only two real quibbles I had. Outside of those two things, I didn't really have too much to complain about. What I would strongly suggest, all of you watching, if you've not seen it and you're a fan of professional wrestling, definitely go see it. If you are not a fan of wrestling, again, I don't know why you're watching us, but if you're not, you still will watch a very compelling family drama. I think that it's one of those that it's, if you didn't know it was a true story and you weren't a wrestling fan, you would maybe go in and think it was over the top, that it was too much, that no one would believe it until you look up and find out that this is actually a true story that happened to a family. And Doug, true story. Now let's talk about the things with the true story that either are changed in the film or were left out of the film. And I want to start with the most glaring. And again, I think this is, if you're a wrestling fan, it's the most glaring. If you're just a movie fan, I don't know that it changes the basic story of the movie. But we have a brother who is left out completely. The youngest Von Erich, Chris, like two brothers before him, also died of suicide. He was 21, killed himself in 1991. I know there are only so many minutes in a movie. This will be another character that you would have had to develop. But also it could be argued, the basic elements of the film are not changed by another similar story with another suicide. It's still strange to me, though, that the oldest brother, who died in a childhood accident, is included, but the youngest, who was actually a pro wrestler, like the famous siblings, did not. Is it too much tragedy to bear? Is it strange to you that there is no Chris Von Erich in this film?
So it was initially, but then I saw an interview with the actor or the director who actually directly addressed this. And I believe you also talked to Kevin Von Erich about it. And I think, this is one of those where not necessarily seeking the blessing of, but, getting at least a firm nod from him, where he talked about it was too similar to, I think, Carrie's death. And, the story is very, very similar. And two stories that similar, again, in such a heavy movie with so much death and so much tragedy anyway. He felt that was a bit, a bridge too far. And after talking with family and working through it, it was agreed upon that, okay, from our storytelling standpoint, we don't want to tell the same story twice because it is too similar to another story. And there's so much death in this story already.
I understand his argument, and I understand that run times being what they are, he would have added to the length of the movie. It is a little strange and maybe even hard for people to believe who aren't wrestling fans or who are just casual fans who maybe don't know the Von Erich story from the 80s, that there's not four brothers, there's five wrestling like there's another one in there that also ends tragically. This story, as heavy as it was on screen, could have been heavier and even more tragic had they really gone there for it. Yeah, that one's a weird one to me. I can understand his rationale, but editing one brother out completely was odd. Um, but obviously, Carrie and his suicide sort of marked the apex of the story on the
Mm-hmm.
screen, and it's a brutal moment for Kevin, especially. An element of this part of the story, though, that's left out is the fact that Carrie had his own family. Um, he was married for nearly a decade and was divorced only shortly before his suicide. He left behind 2 daughters, one of which, Lacey, would go on to be a pro wrestler with TNA. So the film makes it seem like Carrie was alone and desperate rather than a family man
Mm-hmm.
struggling with his mental health and substance abuse and all of that. Um, I guess that's more for dramatic purposes. And I can sort of understand that you can't get into everybody's family, but Kevin and his family, both his wife and his kids, become such a central part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is strange and worth noting that Carrie was also a family man, even though he's not portrayed that way.
You know what? I never really thought about that, but you are absolutely right because, it seems like Kevin's family, Kevin's wife specifically, is a very much an anchor into reality that pulls him not pulls him away from the family, but grounds him in reality and keeps him at least,
Yeah.
I don't want to say sane through all this, but sane through everything, and is his rock and his his lighthouse really to bring him through all this. And I mean, when he's sleeping on the floor at the sportatorium, so he doesn't want to go home and bring the Von Erich curse home to his kids, she's like,
Yeah. And the fact that, he's doing this so much for his wife and kids, I understand as a narrative that is sort of an anchor in the film. And maybe it would be difficult to show that the other men had those anchors too and why
mm-hmm.
they weren't affected similarly. They are either portrayed as being alone or just not referenced that. And Carrie wasn't the
Mm-hmm.
only one. Mike was married as well. That wasn't portrayed.
Right.
And also, just like Carrie's family not being depicted, David had a child and was married. The child was from his first wife, which is probably why they didn't take the time to include, either an ex-spouse
Mm-hmm.
or a current spouse for David.
Right.
Having to explain that, but in a movie that maybe could not have handled additional tragedy, David's daughter had died 5 years before he did. She was only 13 weeks old and had died of SIDS.
I don't think that movie, first of all, I don't think that movie could have taken another death anyway. I could not have taken another death watching that movie.
When you talk about the curse,
I
when you
know,
start
right?
looking, when you expand out just enough to say if we'd included a few more characters on the fringes of the family, it's not a prettier picture than what we saw on screen. It's just as tragic.
Right. And, from a storytelling standpoint, I think, you need to get people to care about the characters, and and then you get these characters pulled away tragically, and then it just becomes so much heavier, I think. I, it's a
That's
very good
something
point to
that,
bring up, but this movie could have been like 3 to 6 hours long if we
oh,
addressed every Von Erich too. Because I mean,
true.
we could spin off into poor Lacey. I've seen some of her YouTube
Oh,
coverage of like wrestling conventions and things, and Lacey has her own demons she's clearly battling since she left TNA.
yeah. I mean, don't want to be superstitious, but the idea of a curse, you can understand where people
Yes.
could possibly conjure that up. I know we talked about, how much heavier can a movie get. I want to talk a bit about substance abuse issues. I think in not that it was glossed over, but it was very much underplayed, I guess, in the film version. You said it that you need to get sympathy on these characters. You have to care
Mm-hmm.
about them, and maybe too much substance abuse might have complicated that for some people. The Von
Yeah.
Erichs were rock stars, though, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it was Texas in the
Especially in
1980s,
Texas. Yeah.
so they lived like rock stars of that 80s era, which meant drugs and girls.
Mm-hmm.
The promotion, actually, World Class did a lot to push them. Fritz did a lot to push them as these good
Right.
Christian boys. And the narrative of the movie shows that that's the case. But the narrative only hints at steroids on screen. And when we see it, we know that, okay, it's happening, but they don't really go into just how bad it was. If we were really being accurate in this film, Kevin may be the only one of the bunch that did not have an alcohol or drug problem. In fact, rumors persisted for years that the death of David in Japan was not due to the perforated colon story, but was instead a drug overdose. None other than Ric Flair himself, in his biography, said that he was bold enough to spell it out and said that David's death was related to pain pills and that Bruiser Brody was the one who got rid of all the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've thought though, and maybe this is because I wasn't exposed to the Von Erichs, in the 80s until, maybe even after Kerry was out of the WWE or WWF at the time. And it was more like, I found out about the Von Erichs after the fact and started learning about them. But to me, and maybe this is where I'm just like a wrestling mark, I thought a lot of that was just implied, or maybe that was just, I projected that onto the movie, knowing what I know about the family and seeing the Vice coverage of it and just other documentaries about the Von Erichs at this point. But I can see where if you're not a wrestling fan, if you're not absorbing that and just thinking about it anyway, because I just think it kind of goes in hand, because like you said, they were rock stars of the wrestling world in the 80s in Texas. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, they came out to Rush.
It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and we see the needles. But yes, I think it's very much implied, and we fill in the blanks. I'll get into a little more because when it gets to the end of the Kerry story, there's more with the substance abuse that could come in that actually is relevant to his story. But again, there's only so much time, and I understand that it's an easier story to tell without the complications of drug abuse when you're trying to get sympathy on a character. Let's talk about the origins of the curse, though, Doug. Fritz there's a reason these boys aren't known as Atkinses, their real name, right? We begin the film showing Fritz in his heyday, black and white, playing a German. And that's how the Atkinses become the Von Erichs. What it doesn't show, though, is Fritz playing that role as a stereotypical Nazi. Supposedly, there were even some in the family circle who believed that the curse resulted from the Nazi origins of the family heritage. I mean, if they would have shown Fritz von Erich coming out in his ring attire, you have the Iron Cross right there on his back. They did not depict the swastika, but it was definitely part of that era of wrestling that it was not atypical to do that. And Fritz did that. It's kind of cringy today to think about it, but they went there and they didn't go there in the movie.
Right. Because I don't think you can do that. You just can't do that. You just can't.
You cannot.
You can't do that. But, in wrestling or in a movie about wrestling at this point, in 2023, 24 that we're in now. But yeah, I've thought that's interesting. It's because of, Fritz, depicting a Nazi that, this, brings about the curse and, darkens the family name. And
there's Fritz, some real wild theories about like how many deaths in the Von Erich family and some ghost of like, Holocaust survivors that had the same number and was taking,
wow. Wow.
It's some Kevin Kelly kind of conspiracy stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I don't necessarily fault Fritz. I mean, he was far from the only he didn't go out there and, espouse Nazi beliefs of his own accord. Playing a Nazi was not uncommon for the time because those were the bad guys.
Right. Just like, like in the 80s, when I came into wrestling and, we were watching it, around here, it's the Iranian, the Sheik, the this, the that,
Yeah. Yeah, Russians, exactly. It still was that way. It's, but you are, I think, right as why maybe that change was made is that in 2023, 2024, you don't necessarily need to see those things. And even if it's being portrayed in a movie, probably not necessary. But Fritz in his portrayal, he wasn't cuddly.
No, not at all.
But
Not
he was not also portrayed as a straight up monster either. They could, though, have put additional truths on the screen that would have definitely pushed the perception of Fritz even more into the villain category. We do see him pushing Mike, even when it's clear that Mike doesn't have the same level of talent nor desire to participate. He wanted to be an artist. We even see him push Mike back into the ring after Mike nearly dies of toxic shock syndrome. That is true. That is what happened. What was left out was just how crass Fritz could be about this promotion and pushing of his sons. Fritz actually had the audacity to begin billing Mike as the living miracle, was his nickname, after he escaped real life tragedy and near death. Mike is shown somewhat after this health issue as being maybe a little hampered, unable to speak. There was actually some serious brain damage, and they don't really say that there was serious brain damage, but it's probably the toxic shock that likely contributed to the eventual suicide. So if they wanted to go there, they could have explored that. But again, that's almost another story you would have to tell.
That's so very true. And a lot of this, the more we talk about it, there's a lot I think that's heavily implied in the movie, and you're left to fill in the blanks, because the actor who plays Mike, definitely plays that part of somebody who's had like a TBI, but there or something of that nature, because there's definitely deficits after he gets out of the hospital. Definitely. Deficits.
And you're right. I think that is probably implied and left for us to realize that, okay, something's not right with Mike. They could have probably, though, it would have been 10 seconds of the movie when they're showing Mike getting pushed back in the ring, him being billed as the living miracle, which is actually the truth. Unless they just were maybe afraid of Fritz, rather than being a complicated character, maybe they were afraid that he would come across pure on villain if they went and showed that he actually was crass enough to do that to his son.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot more you could have thrown in on Fritz. He also pushed for fake Von Erich and this gets to the MJF thing I mentioned earlier. So, obviously we have fake brothers in the world of wrestling. Fritz's brother back in the day was Waldo, and who wasn't his real brother. So once the real life Von Erichs came in short supply, because in real life they were dying, Fritz made up a Von Erich. It was Waldo's kid. Here's Lance Von Erich, the storyline cousin. Even though we see MJF portraying Lance, they don't mention or explore how this is supposed to be a Von Erich, and how the fans rejected this fake Von Erich in the midst of all this real tragedy. This was the I guess maybe the beginning when kayfabe starts to break, because they knew so much about the Von Erichs. People knew, okay, this is BS, and they resoundingly rejected it when they were having real sympathy for the real family. And you dare put Lance Von Erich out there and want us to pretend he is a Von Erich family member?
Right. It's like, the band breaks up, but then like the one person in the band goes back out on the road with an entirely new band and tries to sell it as the same band. That's what Fritz was doing here to keep the Von Erichs alive, or keep the that's very poor choice of words. keep the name of the wrestling family alive and push the wrestling family forward, so there'd be some sort of wrestling legacy there.
One last Fritz audaciousness story. So he used David's death to get the world title on Kerry. That's sort of shown, or as Doug, you've mentioned a few times, there's some things that are sort of implied. We sort of see it happen in the order where it's obvious that Fritz is leveraging. But what isn't really showed is just how tasteless and shameless he was in promoting this big Texas Stadium event as a memorial, a public memorial, in order to sell tickets and draw a crowd. He even had a song produced, and go, again, head to the YouTubes. Heaven Needed a Champion was used exactly. Fritz did not, there was not a line of taste that Fritz wouldn't cross, and that includes the real life deaths of his own children. but he hosts this big public memorial and uses a song called "Heaven Needed a Champion" to explain why David had to go away.
Oh, you know, maybe it's worth a show in the future where we look at, promoters throughout history and how they get the Carney reputation and how cutthroat they can be. I mean, because this isn't Vince McMahon level, uh, but it's up there, man. It is
Yeah.
up there.
And I don't know. I mean, it's not at the in the level of like the stories we're hearing about Vince now, but when you realize these are your own children,
Right?
and you're pushing them in the ring and billing them as the living miracle and things, that it doesn't. I understand why they didn't go heavy on that, because then we would have no complicated understanding that Fritz
Right.
was a man of a different time. He would have just been pure screen villain, and
Mhm.
it would be less nuanced if you actually told the truth. It's harder to make Fritz look sympathetic
Yes.
in this scenario.
I don't I do think it looks very poor. Fritz looks very, very poor at Carrie's
He
death.
does.
It is, it's just a very poor portrayal at that point. I mean, not the acting, but the way Fritz is at that point in the story. I don't know if this is a man who's just exhausted after losing son after son after son or what, but
It's
it
true.
it doesn't shine a good light on Fritz that he's almost careless about it, at this point. Maybe he's gone numb, and maybe that's the way the actor was trying to portray the character at that
Portray
point.
him.
I don't know, but I had a hard time, wrapping my head around those reactions at that point in the movie. But again, I was exhausted as I think Fritz was in the entire family because it is an emotionally draining movie.
Um, Speaking of Carrie, there's that big night when he topples Flair. So for dramatic purposes,
Mhm.
we see Carrie at the height of his career winning the belt, and then later at the low of his career losing his leg in that motorcycle accident. The movie gets the impression that that was the same night. In truth, the
Mhm.
accident was 2 years after that night, and Carrie did not have to forfeit the world title because of losing his foot. Rather, he lost the belt back to Flair rather quickly, and then years later is when he lost his leg. The film hammers home the idea of family and how it can pull together. Obviously, as it also tries to tear itself apart. Um, it's Fritz and Doris are seen sort of holding it together while
Mhm.
enduring the loss of all of their sons. It's only at the movie's end when Fritz finds out that Doris isn't cooking him dinner, and we get the feeling that she's had enough and that
Right?
she's leaving him.
Mhm.
In reality, the couple had divorced in 1992, a year after Chris's suicide and a year before Carrie's. For dramatic purposes, they
Mhm.
obviously made it a change to show these parents enduring this loss together when that really wasn't the way it went down. Again, dramatic license, I can
Sure.
forgive that one. Another, Doug, is that Kevin and his wife Pam had daughters before having their sons. In the movie, they do it the other way around
Mhm.
because the sons obviously are going to enter the ring themselves later on, and so it just made it an easier story to tell to show the two little boys first.
Yeah.
Just the thematic purposes to keep
I
that story centered on brothers, brothers,
That
brothers,
exactly.
brothers.
I
Right?
think that it follows that brotherly theme throughout. So it does make dramatic sense. If it's not historically accurate, I think that makes sense and is forgivable.
So there wasn't a postcard from Carrie that was delivered to Kevin after his
Right.
death. Again, I understand that storyline purposes, I can forgive that. The one thing, though, and I said I'd get back around to drug addiction and the death of Carrie. So the on-screen suicide of Carrie is just interesting from a lot of regards. And I don't know that this makes a bit of difference to the flow of the movie, but just for purposes of our show, separating fact from fiction, the on-screen suicide of Carrie actually mixes in details that were really from the suicide of Chris, the brother
Mhm.
who was not in the film. So there was 3 suicides that ended up taking place on the family ranch, which is just unbelievable. But both Carrie and Chris's suicides were there. It was Chris, though, and not Carrie, who Kevin had pleaded with face to face not to do it. Mike also died on the family ranch, having first hugged his father, telling his dad he loved him, and then wanders off into the woods to do the deed. But Carrie is seen in the movie as pretty much dying with Kevin right there, who goes and gets his body and brings it in. Very dramatic, very powerful. But it was really Chris that Kevin rather had found. Carrie did the deed on the family ranch, but Kevin was not there trying to, cry over his brother's body or any of those sorts of things. So Carrie's death is worth examining. This is my last sort of point where we have a divergence. It's not just how it plays with the facts, but for just how the directors sort of sanded down the more rough edges to put more sympathy on the narrative of Carrie. This goes back to the drug abuse I mentioned earlier. It's true Carrie gave Kevin indication he was going to kill himself, just like the movie shows. But what isn't discussed is the various drug issues that had led Carrie to this point in his life. Multiple arrests. The day that Carrie committed suicide, he was scheduled to be indicted on federal drug charges. Again, if you put that in the film, I understand it makes for a whole less of a sympathetic character than just showing the mental health issue. But the substance abuse and the drug charges were definitely complicating factors in the Carrie Von Erich story and what led him to such a awful end.
Yeah, I do think the drug use is implied throughout, but yeah, and I think you do nail it because the sympathy for the characters becomes less and less. If you plug in these criminal charges and show them as like these hopeless struggling folks struggling with addiction.
Yeah, you show multiple arrests and two little girls at home and all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes it hard, but it is a much more bottom line. Iron Claw is a fantastic movie for either the wrestling fan or non-wrestling fan. Tons of Easter eggs for wrestling fans that get to feel the 1980s wrestling scene again, depicted in really realistic detail. But the truth of the matter is you have to cut some things out. You have to change some things. And there's a lot that you could quibble about that was changed. But at the end of the day, it's mainly because the real life on Eric's story somehow is more complicated, more tragic, and sadder than what the movie is. And it is already a very heavy movie.
Very heavy movie. Emotionally exhausting. It really is.
And with
a great movie.
Folks, it's a great movie, worth your time. Definitely go see it and let us know in the comments what you think and what you think
of our comments.
Yeah, our review, our critique, and anything that I centered on like 12, 13 things that differed in real life from the movie. I'm sure there's more. If you know of more, let us know that as well.
Absolutely.
With that, Doug, let's hit ourselves a big finish.
Let's do it. Let's hit
Botch
this big finish. Botch of the week. Here we go, man. So we had Revolution last weekend. We previewed it beforehand and stayed off the air because we did not want to, conflict with that. But, as we do when we cover pay-per-views, we didn't really cover the pay-per-view after glory of that pay-per-view. But I do want to touch on it because I think it is a complete botch on Mr. Tony Khan to have Jay White in a pre-show. Complete botch.
There is a lot right now being said about, the use of Jay White, a Tokyo Dome headliner. And he's I think the Bang Bang Scissor Gang is funny, but is that the best role for a Jay White?
I don't like the Bang Bang Scissor Gang. I like the Acclaim. I like Bullet Club Gold. I don't like Bang Bang Scissor Gang because I think it's a ridiculous vehicle for Jay White. I think everybody else in that, sure, okay, whatever, but not Jay White. But this is where we are. Hopefully he conducts some big business this week.
So my botch of the week is also AEW related, not to Revolution, but it's misuse of character. And again, Tony Khan, I know we been calling you out on this lately, but you got Kazuchika Okada, like one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. He finally makes his debut. The fans are hot to see him, and you turn him heel like immediately. Doug, MJF was a heel that like fans wanted to cheer. Like one of your leads right now is Swerve Strickland. The fans are like so behind, but he's a heel. Your world champion is a heel. Now that Orange Cassidy lost his title, every title holder in AEW are heels with the vacated tag titles, which again was just a quick switch off of Sting and Darby to set up a tournament. Because if there's one thing that Tony loves more than heels, maybe it's tournament.
You called it.
But Daniel Bryan, am I supposed to cheer him or boo him? Does it depend on the week and who he's facing?
I'm not sure if there's a babyface. I think it does. I think there are too many tweeners, and I don't know. It's like, I don't want to do this week, Tony. I mean, we talked about it at the head of the show. Oh, okay, you don't have to do that. We'll just rewrite everything then.
I know that playing a heel is supposedly more fun. I get that. I probably would feel the same way about it. But where are the strong baby faces in AEW? You have Okada coming in, and the fans are hot for him. He would be already positioned towards the top of your card, ready to step into the main event scene, and you turn him heel right off the get-go instead of letting it play out.
I don't, I know Okada, the reason Okada is in AEW is because of the Bucks. He gets to come back and he gets to hang out with his friends. He could have went to WWE and had a WrestleMania moment, but at the end of the day, and Okada may still have a WrestleMania moment. What do you have, like a 3-year contract? So 3 years, maybe Okada moves on to WWE then. But I get that he wanted to come here and hang out with his friends. He doesn't have to relocate. He can commute just like Ospreay does. But they put him with his friends right away because the elite, I don't know what's going on with the elite. I don't know.
I just don't get why you would make. There's plenty of time to turn him heel down the road. Let's enjoy the fact that we have Okada and not do what he did. But Tony loves to swerve for the sake of swerves. So
true.
Here we are with my botch.
Yeah.
Doug, performance of the week.
Wait, match or performer. What are we doing now?
Let's do performance.
Performance. Okay. Ospreay. Ospreay and oh gosh, Kanish. I can't say that.
Konosuke Takeshita.
Thank you. Those two at Revolution, hands down, man. We got
your match and performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to shout out Sting just because of Sting's retirement match, but I mean Ospreay.
I'm going to copy you twice. Last week you gave Sting your performer of the week. I'm giving it to Sting this week for the reasons you just stated. It was his final match. He did not go out there and go through the motions. It was good to be covered in a tag match where, Darby Allin tries to kill himself on your behalf. Darby. It was an exciting contest, and Sting was in front of the Greensboro crowd where back in '88 he had the match with Rick, and Rick is there, and I mean there was so much that was perfect about the ending of it, that the fact that he's one of the rare folks to go out on top as opposed to going out on their back, which supposedly Sting wanted to do, but Tony Khan and the Bucks would not let him. The reports were that they would not let him do it. And then there was also a report that Ric Flair wanted to turn on him one last time, and Tony wouldn't let that happen.
Of course,
I couldn't imagine it playing out any better than it did. And so in that regard, thank you, Sting. It was a perfect ending. His son's involved, and you had Crow Sting and
the NWO Sting. Exactly.
There was they hit all the beats in that one. It was a really cool send-off, done really well. So performance of the week goes to Sting. Match of the week, Konosuke Takeshita versus Will Ospreay. People have waited so long to see Will Ospreay in a full-time in an American promotion. This is the first match under the banner of AEW where he's fully committed really to AEW, and there's a reason why he has more 5-star matches to his name than I think he's like 15 or so more than number 2 in the Wrestling Observer's history, and Okada's number 2. There's a reason, and American fans who maybe aren't familiar with his Japanese work saw the Will Ospreay that had everyone so excited. That is why it's exciting to have Ospreay on a weekly basis on American television. And no slouch is Takeshita.
Yes,
Takeshita. Man alive, he had to hang with the best wrestler on the planet, and he did more than just his part. He elevated that match to something beyond 5 stars. I think Meltzer gave it like a 5.7 or something like that. I can't argue.
Hold on. I have Wrestling Observer pulled up. Let me see what that match did get. Oh,
I think it is a 5.75.
You're right. 5 3/4. Yeah, 5.75.
I mean, go watch it. If you haven't watched it, it is a clinic. It'll leave you breathless by the end of the night.
Yeah.
Amazing. And speaking of the end of the night, Doug, we have reached the end of the night. But
we have
never fear, fans. We have now that we finished with Iron Claw. We are all mania all the time on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. This is our upcoming schedule. Next week, we're going to talk about the various stories that have collided in this very intriguing WrestleMania story behind the WrestleMania stories. We're going to break that all down. We'll have a Hall of Fame class analysis. Now that we're actually getting, actual inductees, Doug, we're going to be able to talk about them here in a couple weeks. Then, of course, we'll have our preview, and then your two bros are doing 2 shows, as always, on WrestleMania weekend.
I love it.
We'll be going live both after night 1 and after night 2 with our reviews. It's all mania all the time, Doug, until the big weekend itself. I couldn't be happier. This is my favorite time of year. We're going to have it covered from every angle.
Yes, this is my favorite time in the wrestling year too. We're coming up on Wrestling Super Bowl, so this is where everything just kicks up a notch for really every promotion.
And our road to WrestleMania with our show topics begins next week. So join us for the month and all the fun we have coming your way. We'll see you next Sunday at 8 p.m.
Go watch some wrestling. Thanks for watching, everybody.
See ya.